Welcome back to Strange Form. Today, we are going to be looking at the evolution of the Medicom Big Chap and its surprising resemblance to the Romulus Head design. We will also be looking at the surprising resemblance between Kenner's 12-inch Alien Resurrection figure release in 1997 and Medicom's offering that predated it by almost a year. We will not just be looking at all four of the original Real Action Heroes aliens, but also the awesome 5th release that made it into my number 3 spot of my top 10 alien action figures of all time. And don't forget to stay to the end, where we will be talking about the Alien Romulus Prequel comic book and next week's upcoming episode. But first, let's dive into one of the more interesting vintage Japanese alien offerings. First produced in 1996 by Sunrise and Medicom, the company behind the famous Bear Brick and Kubrick Lego-style collectible figures, set out to produce a fully articulated 12-inch action figure line based on an articulated and highly posable body. The line was broken up into different subcategories, one of which was the Real Action Heroes movie line. The first 3 figures in this line were Judge Dredd, the Alien, and the Predator. But in the years to come, hundreds of figures would be added to this line, including everything from Indiana Jones to Star Wars characters, all the way to Clockwork Orange. Like many new toy companies, at the time, the first offerings were far less accurate than later entries. Released in 1996, both in gray and in black, this figure is mostly a rubber costume pulled over an articulated body, and I'm fairly certain that the gray one was released first, and then they changed the mold to black because it looked better. The first figure is the Big Chap, but as you can see, there are a massive amount of inaccuracies, the head being the most interesting one, as what they were trying to do is imply the detail on the inner part of the dome without having to put a translucent piece over the head. So the thing ended up looking like a cross between the Big Chap and the alien from the second movie. I remember seeing this one in a comic book store when it first came out, and it was extremely expensive, largely because it was an import. And at the time, I thought it was interesting simply because there wasn't much on the market, but also entirely too inaccurate to spend that much money on it. But today, the most interesting thing about this figure is how the uncircumcised head shape is so similar to the Romulus creature. I do really wonder if this or one of the ones we will be looking at played a role in the design for the new film. Also released in 1996, here we have the first translucent alien figure. Medicom beat everyone else to the market with an alternate translucent version of the creature, paying tribute to H.R. Giger's first design for the original film. It's interesting, this one has to be handled with gloves, as the soft plastic is actually starting to become tacky. Produced in an extremely limited run, the translucent Real Action Hero alien would complete the 3 aliens to be produced by Medicom in 1996. But in 1997, Medicom would take another crack at the creature in an attempt to produce a more accurate likeness of the Big Chap. Another limited release, Medicom put out a smoky translucent version of the figure with a brand new head sculpt. And it also came with a collector's pin. Though every single one of these was licensed to the original 1979 Alien, this release was the one that was trying its hardest to be representative of the film, having a newly designed articulated jaw and movable inner mouth, as well as a translucent dome showing the inner skull that has been the staple of a great Big Chap figure since Kenner brought theirs to market in 1979. Still suffering from some inaccuracies, this figure did show that Medicom was striving to make something that the fans would want, even going so far as to having a hinged jaw mechanic that collapsed the cheek muscles into the head that NECA would emulate years later. By today's standards, this thing looks derpy and cartoonish, but it was a step in the right direction that would be taken 50 steps forward with their next release. All in all, these aren't terrible Alien releases, and are an interesting footnote in the history of Alien collectibles. But before we head on from here, there's an interesting side note to discuss, that in 1997, Kenner would release a whole line of Alien Resurrection figures. Most of the figures were fairly well sculpted for being children's toys, and for the most part accurately portrayed the creature in the film, other than a few silly ones like the fish alien, rather than just having one that's swimming. But on top of their 8-inch figures, they would also release a 12-inch Signature Series alien. And I wasn't aware of this until Ridgetop21 brought it up on Instagram, but the sculpt for that figure and these Medicom releases is nearly identical. After this was brought to my attention, I had to run and grab my Kenner Resurrection figure out of the attic to compare it to these, prodding me to open it up for the very first time for this episode. Truth be told, I'm opening every one of these for the first time. It's just the Japanese ones aren't sealed in the same way that the Kenner figure is. Kenner definitely did some resculpting here, and there are some mechanics that are a bit different, but 80% of the body is identical to the Medicom release. And Medicom puts a sheet giving credit to the sculptors and designers for the product, which is nowhere to be found on the Kenner release. So I have no idea if Kenner simply picked this figure up and decided to retool it into their own product, or if they asked Medicom directly if they could use it as a sculpt jumping off point. But what I do know is that Kenner did not give any credit to the original designers. And it's not like they were taking from an unlicensed product. All of the Medicom real-action heroes are properly licensed through 20th Century Fox. Looking at these two figures side by side is really surreal, as the Kenner model almost feels like a bootleg figure. Some details are exactly reproduced, and others are reversed. A few things look like bad recasts of the original part. The articulation has been changed too, to help for cheaper manufacturing. The head looks like an amalgamation of both the original Medicom release and the 1997 limited edition release. Overall, everything is just a little bit worse than the Medicom release. If you head on over to Hideous Plastic, he has pictures of the prototype model for this one, and I'm guessing what happened is that they grabbed the Medicom and did a couple of quick recasts, retooling it and then put it into production, as it doesn't resemble the Resurrection alien at all, and really seems to be a last-minute add-on to the Resurrection collection. And like I said before, the company did have reference material for the Resurrection creature. The signature figure was just a strange cash grab, but now that I have the 4 original figures and the missing link, let's look at what Medicom learned between their initial release in 1996 and the 5th release in 2008. Part of the same real action hero line that had been running strong since the mid-90s, in 2008 Medicom released one of the best 12-inch alien figures ever produced. First released in Japan, and then through Sideshow Collectibles, Medicom released a slightly posable 12-inch tall Big Chap with limited articulation using a soft plastic suit over an internal armature. The choice not to use rubber is probably why this figure has held up so well over the years, but also the reason that there isn't a whole lot of really fine detail on the figure. That being said, the silhouette is completely perfect, and every major shape from the original movie costume is reproduced with loving accuracy. My only 3 major gripes about this one would be that the heel spurs don't have enough detail to be identified as an animal jawbone, and the figure lacks any really serious paint details. That being said, I've seen many Japanese collectors rehaul this one to an amazing effect. And lastly, there's the fact that it is 12 inches and not true 1/6 scale. I understand that the real action hero line is not about scale in that everything is 12 inches, regardless of the height difference between the original designs. It's more about having uniform 12-inch tall figures rather than having them in scale. But that's a shame, because it would have been awesome if this thing was in proper scale to Hot Toys Lieutenant Ripley. That being said, this is a good toy analog to the 1/5 scale Roswell statue, and will have to do until I'm a millionaire and can afford all the high-end statues. The Mamagore still being my ultimate grail. Honestly, I could spend an entire episode just on the anatomy of that one. After seeing this whole lineup, what do you think? Is this obscure 90s release where inspiration for the look of the Romulus Xenomorph came from? And the more I look at these, the more I realize that it's not just the head that bears a resemblance to the Romulus creature, but also the sort of triangular upper torso, as well as the hip joints and slightly angular shape of the back tubes. Who knows, maybe I stumbled onto something here, as I'm sure that if the designer was a big Alien fan, he probably would have been aware of these, and creature designers take their inspiration from everywhere. I think I'm going to revisit this one when I have the NECA figure in hand to look at the similarities 1-to-1. As for the Romulus comic book, well, I've read it twice now, and I have to say that I was fairly disappointed. Really, I was hoping for a longer and more complicated pre-story, helping to build and flesh out the world, giving us a better understanding of what the Renaissance Station was trying to accomplish. Instead, what we get is a very short 30-page short, and there are spoilers here, so tune out of this part if you don't want to hear about the rest of the comic. But the entire thing revolves around a couple of generic security personnel deciding that they need to launch the newly collected Big Chap meteorite into space. That's it. That's the entire reason the station went sideways. A pair of G.I. Joe characters went rogue and awakened the Big Chap because they wanted to launch the dormant creature into space. And they did all of this after the scientists had created a whole bunch of facehuggers. Basically, the loss of the station happened over only a matter of hours after the Big Chap was released by the idiot security team. The creature then went and released a whole bunch of newly genetically modified facehuggers by smacking their little briefcases with its tail. All the while, Rook was attempting to synthesize the Prometheus fire compound using the ship's computer while chaos is ensuing across the station, and then the depth perception challenge Space Marine lady kills the Big Chap, causing a massive decompression, which Rook shuts down after she's been flung out into space. They had a chance here to talk about things like engineering the creatures to gestate faster, or how the hive was set up in the basement, but that's not what they did. The comic didn't read like a portion of the script that had been left out. The whole thing felt more like the kind of mini comic booklet that you would get with an action figure. I really wish that they had taken their time with this one and made it a several issue story. The only thing I think that was interesting was that the station had a breach sealing ability, so that at least explains why Rain and Andy were able to escape a complete vacuum after killing so many of the xenomorphs in the elevator shaft. Except for, that's not completely true either, because it was also explained in the comic that Rook needs to activate the hull breach mechanism. So maybe in that end scene, he was feeling generous. The comic sort of begs more questions than it answers. Now, I know some people will really enjoy it for being a silly action storyline, but if you're hoping for anything more nuanced, and were disappointed by the storytelling in the film, this is really just more of the same in an even more cartoony package. As for the artwork, it doesn't really hold a candle to the first few Dark Horse Alien storylines, but it's not the worst I've seen either. All in all, it's fairly standard comic book fare. So my final judgment is that it didn't really add anything of worth to the storyline, and your headcanon about things was probably better. And in the end, it actually sort of subtracts from the overall tone a little bit. The artwork is okay, but honestly, this one isn't really what I want bouncing around in my head on my second watch of the film. In the end, I really wish they took their time with it and made it into a several issue story, especially one that did a good deal more world building and kept a more serious tone. But beyond my complaints regarding Romulus, I am really excited about the Hot Toys' newly announced figure, as the creature from Romulus is one of the best things to come out of the Alien franchise in decades, and this may be my second or third favorite design for the creature in any medium, and I'm kind of hoping that some of this rubs off on Alien Earth, but we will see soon enough, I suppose. Now on to my last topic. The next episode, premiering this coming week, will be a 30-minute reading of the first chapter of my book. At first, I was just going to show the TB League Egyptian gods set to my reading. However, I quickly realized that at 30 minutes, that would get a little redundant and might distract from the storytelling a bit, as the images would not sync up with what I was saying. So I decided to do something a little more involved. Basically, I used a combination of my own artwork, Midjourney, and a photo animation video program to create a storyboard for the script. To those of you sensitive to AI, as an artist, I understand. But also as an artist, I understand that I should be the one experimenting with creative ways of using this rather than leaving it up to the business side of the industry. And storyboarding an idea is actually a good use of Midjourney. But I will say that every image was trained on my own sketches and artwork, and every single image was worked on a great deal in Photoshop, as the program simply couldn't completely realize what I had in my head. Some of the images were trained on TB League figures to get proper reference regarding blocking and framing, and like I said, everything else was trained on my artwork and photography. The reason I decided to go this route is I simply don't have the time or resources to come up with the many images used for this video, and I wanted to show something that created a palette for the story. This story is a passion project, and one I have been working on for the better part of my life. It's part one of a proposed 3-part series that deals with the world of the gods and the world of men, and how they often are locked into a codependent relationship. A cycle of man's belief altering the gods, and the gods altering man's belief. The first book centers around the final days of Mark Antony and Cleopatra, as the Egyptian and Greek gods contend with the Roman encroachment into their culture. All the while, the proto-gods of Western Europe are seeing an exploitable power vacuum in the animist beliefs of the tribal people of that region. If you love history, theology, and obscure occult references, this might be the story for you. The opening chapter is a prologue told from first-person point of view, though other than one other chapter, the rest of the book is told from the third-person point of view. I wanted to open the story with something that was intimate. Book 2 would jump ahead and take place during the Arthurian legend and through the Dark Ages across about 500 years, introducing us to a host of new gods, including the Norse deities. The third book is actually where the entire idea originated from, and would take place during the modern era, in that it stemmed from a conversation between me and a friend when we were teenagers, where we were talking about how interesting it would be to see a story where a group of wrongly sentenced prisoners had one chance to escape hell, as in the actual underworld, and that was during the apocalypse. So a prison escape set during an enormous prison riot of gods and monsters. The first book has been completely finished, coming in at just over 100,000 words. Book 2 and 3 have full skeleton outlines written and have been plotted, but I haven't begun writing those yet. And you, my fine viewers, are going to be the A/B test for the viability of this story, as the success of this episode would allow me a jumping-off point for shopping the book. If this one proves popular, I am considering turning the first book into a podcast, though I don't know I will be able to do as in-depth a visual presentation, as the photo manipulation alone took me around a month to complete. However, I will definitely continue with the same narration style and audio effects. So if you end up liking the opening to this book, shout it from the rooftops, and let's see if we can create some viral buzz around this project. And if you'd like to contact me about the project, you can do so through YouTube or via instant messages through Instagram. The link is in the description. And on a side note, soon I will also be offering a P.O. box for subscribers to send items they would like to see featured on the show. More about that in a coming episode. And as always, you've been an amazing audience, and I would like to thank you for your patience with me as I struggle through my issues with Alien Romulus. I hope you enjoyed this episode and will join me next time. And remember, never stop collecting.